This lesson is a review lesson on order of operations with exponents and absolute value. So I'm going to begin talking about exponents. We've done quite a bit of work with exponents. So something, for example, like 3 to the second power, that actually means 3 times 3, which is 9. 4 to the third power will be 4 times 4 times 4, which is 64. Now that part should be pretty easy. We've covered that in 7th grade. You've seen that in previous years as well. But this is where students start to get a little confused, is when these exponents are actually in an order of operation problem. And then you start having negative numbers. So there is a very large difference between this and this. Okay, so the first one has parentheses, the second one does not. As you can see from this first one with the parentheses, what you need to think about is what is the exponent next to, because whatever it's next to, that's indicating what actually is being squared. So for example, this 2 right here is next to this parenthesis. So what that's telling me is it's everything inside the parenthesis that's being squared. So this would be a -3 times a -3, which gives me a +9. The second example, the 2 is next to the 3. And so instead of the negative sign being squared, it's only next to the 3. There are no parentheses, and so only the 3 is getting squared. So this is basically saying take the opposite of 3 squared, or 3 times 3, which ends up giving us a -9 answer. So as you can see, it's really, really important for you to recognize if there's parentheses or if there's not parentheses in regard to exponents. Now what about something like this? What about 2 to the third power? Let's do -2 inside parentheses and here. Okay, is there a big difference? Is one going to be positive? Is one going to be negative? Well, again, here the 3 is touching the parentheses, so everything inside the parentheses is to the third power. So let's see, 2 times 2 is 4 times 2 is 8, and a negative times a negative times a negative, that's 3 negatives, so that's going to yield a negative answer. Let's look at the next one. Okay, -2 to the third power says take the opposite, and here notice that this 3 is only touching the 2, so only the 2 is going to be to the third power. So that also gives us a -8. So the question is, why is the red example giving us a 9, +9 and a -9, or a positive answer and a negative answer, yet the blue is giving us both negatives? Okay, well here's your clue. Okay, the exponent. If the exponent is even, then you're going to have a positive answer and a negative answer. Here, the exponent is odd, and so since the exponent's odd, you're only going to get negatives because there's an odd number of negative signs. Whereas the red example, there's an even number of negative signs. So something to keep in mind as we go through and do some of these order of operation problems. The next part that I want to remind you of is the order of operations, and there's really only 4 for the order of operations. The first one would be parentheses, and an important thing to remember, this is any grouping symbol. So it's not just parentheses. It could be parentheses. Your parentheses could look like this or like this, but also it's absolute value. So absolute value is grouping whatever is inside those absolute value bars as well. So keep that in mind as we go through and do these problems. The second order of operation is exponents. The third is multiplication and division. And the important thing to remember about this is you just work left to right. So it doesn't mean that you're always going to multiply before you divide. You might actually divide before you multiply. It depends on what comes first. And the last one is going to be addition and subtraction. And same thing here, we're going to work left to right. So let's try this next example. We'll call this example 1. We're going to do 26 minus parentheses 2 times 5 parentheses squared. Okay, so our very first step is going to be inside the parentheses, and we know 2 times 5 is 10. Our next step is going to be to square a number. So notice that this 2 is touching the parenthesis, so everything inside the parenthesis is what's being squared. So 10 is being squared. That would be like 10 times 10, or 100. And here we can see that we've got a subtraction of integers problem. If we do the 2-line rule, we now need to take 100 and subtract the 26. So that becomes that becomes 0. This becomes 10, but then becomes 9, so I can borrow here, and this becomes 10. So we've got 4 and 7, so our answer is negative 74. So let's take a look at this next example. We're going to evaluate each expression for x equals negative 2. So we're going to substitute negative 2 in for each of these x's. And one of the most important things to remember is when you substitute, especially a negative number. Okay, so right here we're subbing in a negative number. You have to put parentheses in your problem where you're subbing. Okay, so for example, I can rewrite this as 5 and then a set of parentheses to represent my x and then my cubed. And that means that I now know I'm going to put the negative 2 inside those parentheses. Keep in mind, x is being cubed, so if x is negative 2, then negative 2 has to be cubed, not just the 2, but also the negative sign. So now we have order of operations, which is telling us to take negative 2 to the third power. So negative 2 times negative 2. And now it's just a simple multiplication. So 5 times 2 is 10, times 2 is 20, times 2 is 40. And there's 1, 2, 3 negative signs. That is odd. So our answer is negative 40. Here, we've got 5. And instead of putting in just negative 2, I'm going to put that inside parentheses. And that's inside parentheses and then cubed. So now this is basically saying, let's do what's inside the parentheses first. So 5 times negative 2 is going to give us negative 10. And it's negative 10 to the third power. So notice the 3 is outside the parentheses, so everything inside the parentheses is cubed, not just the 10, but the negative sign. So that's going to be a negative 10 times negative 10 times negative 10, which gives us 1,000. And there are 3 negative signs to make that a negative 1,000. So let's go through the next couple of examples. Letter A says y minus 10 minus, in parentheses, negative x. Keep in mind we're evaluating each expression for x equals 2 and y equals negative 4. So I'm going to start by putting in negative 4 for y. Okay, then we've got the negative 10 minus parentheses negative, and now I'm going to replace x with a 2. Okay. Now the parentheses, the red parentheses that I have around the 2 aren't as important if you are looking at a positive number that you're substituting in as opposed to a negative number. So just kind of keep that in mind. But if you are subbing in a negative number, that is really, really important. So let's see, this says negative 4 minus 10 minus a negative 2. So it looks like we can do the 2-line rule here. So we have negative 4 minus 10 plus 2. We're just going to take it one step at a time. So negative 4 minus 10, is a subtraction problem. We'll do the 2-line rule. And as you can see, the 4 is negative and the 10 is negative, so that's same sign sum. So negative 14. And then plus 2, well, here we have different signs difference, so now we're going to take the difference, and then we take the sign of the larger number. Letter B, I have a subtraction sign, and I do have to put parentheses for that x. It's being squared, plus the absolute value of 3 times, and then I'm going to put another set of parentheses there for my y. Now I'm ready to substitute. In for x is 2, okay, and in for y is negative 4. So this says we're squaring the parenthesis, which is just the 2, not the negative sign. The negative sign comes down, and then this is going to be 2 times 2, which gives us negative 4. With the absolute value, we have to do the grouping symbol first, which means we have to take 3 times negative 4 first, and we get negative 12. And then we take the absolute value of negative 12 and get positive 12. And then finally, negative 4 plus 12 would be different signs difference, and we get a positive 8.